it is the best job in the world. A lot of people, they just don't understand until they get into this business. So it is a calling, and you can make it terrible or you can make it awesome. When you choose to make it awesome, it's like every day you're waking up 20 minutes before your alarm clock goes off. You're ready to get to work. You get to work 100%. You go to bed. I wonder if we're going to run anything tonight. It's just the whole experience is awesome. It's your second family. Hello, and welcome to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. I'm your host, David Polikoff. I'm pleased to have Joe Grassi on the show with me this month. Joe's a battalion chief in New Jersey. So without me rambling on like I do, Joe, welcome to the show. Introduce yourself. Tell everybody a little bit about you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. Joe Grassi Jr. I'm a battalion chief in Jersey, New Jersey. Got halfway through my career, I guess. Starting my 18th year and enjoying every minute of it. Different role. I'm in my current position for about a little over 4 years. It's different, it's challenging, fun, but not as fun as it was to be on the rig. Tell that to my guys all the time. But yeah, it's great. I can't think of doing anything else, and I'm not even close to thinking about retirement. So I hope it takes a real long time to get there.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's funny, when I got promoted to battalion chief, I was really excited about it. But that is the one thing I miss, is when you're sitting in the command post and you're watching your guys, pulling a line to the front door, and they got good fire blowing on the second floor. And it's like, let me grab my pencil so I can start writing some shit down.
Oh my God.
I found other ways to be happy to reconcile with it. Just watching your guys go to work, knowing that they know what they're doing and making you look good. That's a lot of satisfaction right there. I mean, especially when the bosses come up and say, "Hey man, you really ran a good fire ground." It's like, no, my guys made me look good. That's why the fire ground looks good. So, I mean, you got to take your wins when you get them. But yeah, I would love to be on the other end of that line or on the ladder truck,
No doubt. I say I'm just the guy talking on the radio and, kind of taking a peek at things, but the guys always do it. It's always them, guys and gals.
And the other thing was, you're halfway through your career. I was the same way. I'd talk to a lot of the older guys that were ready to retire, and I would be like, how do you know when it's time to retire? I mean, obviously, if your body's beat up, that's one thing. But if you're relatively healthy and you feel good, it's like, how do you know? The answer I always got was, well, you'll just know. You'll know. And man, if they weren't right, because when I hit my 34 year, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go into our optional retirement plan or our drop plan. That gives me 3 more years, and then I'm going to roll out. That didn't work because another job offer came along. So I rolled out at 34 years, but everybody's like, do you miss it? And I'm like, I don't miss it. I miss some of the guys that I work with, but a majority of the guys that I worked with, well, they had already retired. So there's a lot of newer guys. Miss riding the fire engines, but the new job is a little different. So, now, I was all in Montgomery County. Now that I work in Frederick County, I'm all in Frederick County, and 100% committed to that. But yeah, man, kudos to you. And one of the things that you said, or you alluded to, and I'll throw it out there. It is the best job in the world. A lot of people, they just don't understand until they get into this business. So it is a calling, and you can make it terrible or you can make it awesome. When you choose to make it awesome, it's like every day you're waking up 20 minutes before your alarm clock goes off. You're ready to get to work. You get to work 100%. You go to bed. I wonder if we're going to run anything tonight. It's just the whole experience is awesome. It's your second family, obviously. That's been said 1,000 times. Those guys, your true. Those are your true friends that'll help you bury the bodies, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, there's a body." But
yeah, no doubt, and definitely bites you. It bites the job. I feel like I wasn't one of those kids chasing fire engines. When you get in, it's like you're all in. Or at least I was, and I think most of us that are into the job are like that. You plan everything around the job. You're at work and you're thinking about work, and then you're off work, and it's like, all right, well, how far and how long is it going to be until I go back to work? And then the whole routine starts, and like I'm working tomorrow, so it's like all the lead up and the anticipation and the excitement. And but just what you said before about when it's time to retire, I think everybody I've always spoken to says the same thing. I don't miss like the bullshit. and politics and, the nonsense of the job. I miss the guys. I miss the firehouse. I miss going to the fires, being on the rig. So I think it's the same more or less everywhere in the American fire service, probably the whole, whole world. It's like they say, it's the same thing everywhere, just a different house, different firehouse, different place.
Different language.
Yeah, right, right.
You can go to China and they'll be bitching about B shifts.
Yes, 100%. I know. My B shift is working today. So, yeah, we're in tomorrow. C shift is in. So, and then, D will complain about us and so on.
That's right. It is what it is, but that's good stuff. So are you first generation in fire department, or did it come
first generation? Yeah. My dad was, he kind of had like an affiliation, I guess, to the fire department. So he was chief housing inspector, here in Hoboken. And he coordinated, he did a lot of stuff, like pretty much liaised with the fire department. And then his best friend was a captain on my job. And, he exposed me to it pretty young, like, just seeing that side of it. And that's when I started to get, I guess, somewhat of an interest as I was becoming a young man or whatever. And, then once you're on, it becomes like, how do you ever consider doing anything else? How would you? I was a ball player. I wanted to be like every other kid growing up. You want to play for your local team. For me, it was the Yankees, and like a lot of other kids, it didn't work out. But in hindsight, I wouldn't, even if that was offered to me now, I'd rather be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. So when did you get? How old were you when you got in?
I got in at 22.
Okay.
So yeah, pretty young.
I got in at 18, but I'm third generation,
Wow.
So it's kind of like the family business.
Wow.
My grandfather volunteered. My dad was career, and he was career and volunteer. He was career in D.C. for about 7 years, and he switched over to our local police department. He did that, but he continued to volunteer until the day that they sold their house and moved to Florida, and after he retired and everything. But it was part of the family business. But like you said, once you're in, you're all in. And like I've said before, and my buddy Sam Villani, he says, it's okay to love the job. It's okay to be into the job, and
totally.
That's just the way it is. And it's one of those jobs you don't feel like you're working because you love it so much.
Yeah.
So we'll move forward a little bit. We'll talk. You're a battalion chief in your department. And if anybody hasn't seen, you post a decent amount of videos on Instagram. A lot of them jobs of you rolling up as the battalion chief and taking command and things like that. So I want to talk a little bit. We talked a little bit offline about the inside and outside command. I told you Frank Ritchie and I wrote an article on that, but I want to get your take on running that command from the outside and the pros that you see with that. And like we had talked about, it doesn't matter where you run your command, whether it's inside of a command post or at the command post outside on the street side. It's just different. It's not wrong. There's just different ways to do it. So tell me a little bit about that philosophy and what do you get out of that versus somebody like me who's been in a car their entire career as a command officer.
Well, I mean, I would say like a lot of other things within the fire department, and especially operations and tactics and stuff like that, it's all contingent upon where you work. You do things you do things at your department, and it's not necessarily wrong or right. It's just there's different ways to do things. So, what we were saying before offline was like, there could be 100 reasons why I could justify why my way is right. And then also you could do the same for yours. It doesn't mean either one is wrong or better or worse. I think it's just, again, you got to stick to what you were trained in, what you were exposed to, what you know, what you practice, what you have experience in. But yeah, I mean, for us, we do things where we're an outside command. I should put it, we're in the immediate area of New York City. A lot of the stuff that we do is kind of predicated off of them, obviously minus the manpower, which I don't think anybody in the country has the manpower like New York City. They're doing things very well over there, and they always have, and they always will if they keep training and having the guys like that and the amount. But yeah, I mean, we do things outside just like they do. I think everybody, at least in my immediate area, runs things like that. First thing I would say is probably just you could see the building. I don't know how exactly where you guys park the SUV or whatever you run. But, for us, it's all one-way streets. So sometimes it's tough getting apparatus into the block, let alone, our little pickup truck. And, I put some videos up a few times where we leave it not the best of spots. The guys, they laugh and they bash. And I'm like, yeah.
I see when you're running. I see you running, getting to better.
Yeah, trying to get out of the way. Because it's like, what it is? Everybody always asks, they're like, how the hell do you guys get there first? I'm like, well, we're on a square mile. And we're kind of like strategically placed in the southern end of the city where there's a little bit more of the workload that happens. So like, me and my aide, we're shooting out, we're into the job. As soon as the bells ring, we're like shooting down the stairs. We're jumping in the car. The car was on. We're out the door. The guys are just getting down the stairs, and not because they take their time, just because, they got to 5 to 8, 6 to 8 guys have to get downstairs, get their feet in the boots, throw their coats on, and get out the door. We're rolling before companies are even calling if they're responding. So, the challenge of that is getting the car into the right spot, which is really getting it out of the way, and then not being too far away in the event we need to now set up a command post. We always set up a command post at the job, but like physically set up the board and the tracking and the companies and who's where. So we don't want that to be a block away if we don't need it to be. But what I was getting at before is there's a lot of one-way streets. Pretty much 95% of the city's one-way streets. Once you're in, you're in. And if somebody turns against traffic, if you're like nose to nose with the company that's responding and they're turning in, you're pretty much like locked into the block. And now you could set that domino off of now, all right, now I have the engine 50 to 100 feet further back than you need to be. The second due truck isn't getting anywhere near the front of the building. So, there's only so much stick to stretch. Things along the lines of that. But back to the command thing, I like being in front of the building. I like to be able to see. One thing I've learned from, being a young chief, I guess, is, it's different when you're in a building and you got the radio going off and somebody outside is asking you, like, hey, what's going on? What do you see? Along the lines of that. But now I have to rely on more often than not what I can't see, but what I'm hearing. A lot of these buildings are sealed. We have a lot of old buildings, but a lot of things have been renovated to some degree. Double pane windows, energy efficient windows. They're not, old single pane. So it's like glass isn't going to break as easily. Things could be sealed up. Things could be bottled up. So you're not going to have that heavy fire showing from the front, even though there may be a decent fire inside. And I like to be able to see the front of the building because now it's like if I'm a block away or half a block or whatever, I don't have visual eyes on the building. The building could have been miscategorized. So if the type of building it is, how many floors it is, I might see something as I'm kind of like sitting back and slowing down that the first due company might have been hustling up and they might have missed, it's a 5-story, not a 4. And I told everybody over the radio it's a 4-story building. So it's along the lines of that. Use your senses, I guess. I would say, if I see something out of the ordinary in the street, or if I see a blocked hydrant, I could broadcast that over the radio if I'm right near the building, whereas I might not be able to see it if I'm a little further away. The one thing I would say, though, is, or at least the one big pro to me from the way you guys do it, is that you're in a little bit more of like a controlled environment. It's a little bit more quiet. You can concentrate a little bit better. You can focus more. You can listen. So you don't have that when you're in front of a building and there's, a lot happening.
It's funny. We do have the distraction. Like if we're running inside of the vehicle, and it's the same thing. Like when right before I retired, when I retired in the 1st Battalion in Montgomery County, downtown Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, very tight streets, a lot of one-way streets, very urban, small streets. So if you got cars parked on there, you're only getting like an engine in a truck, and the rest of the box alarms kind of scattered out, and they're stretching along lines. So the cool thing was I don't care about running through people's yards just so I could get a good position, but off the street, So I want to come out of somebody's front yard. We'll talk about it later. You put a push bar on the front of the battalion vehicle and move traffic out of the way if you have to.
Yeah, no doubt.
But we do have the distractions in the vehicle because you've got, we've had 4 mobile radios in there, plus a portable listening to what the police are saying. Our MDCs is up there. And then you always have somebody coming up to the vehicle, knocking on the window and whatnot. So it's not without our distractions. We didn't have aides, and in Montgomery County, I don't have an aide. In Frederick County, they don't have aides. So you're by yourself. You're running a 2nd Battalion chief. So when they get there, they'll get in the car and you work as a command team. Yeah. So that way, that person can be on the passenger side and they can kind of funnel all the face-to-face communication over that direction. It's good having another chief in there because they know what you need without having to ask you what you need.
Right. Take the time.
There's pros and cons to both. And I just want the audience to understand that, with everything, just because you do it this way and somebody does it this way, the outcome ends up being the same. You're commanding the incident. You're being accountable for your people. It's no different than if you beam raise everything on a ladder or you flat raise. It doesn't matter. The ladder's getting up to the window. So people need to understand that just because we do things differently in the fire service doesn't mean that one way is right and another way is wrong. They're just different. And like you said, you can't flood the zone with the amount of people that FDNY throws at a house fire versus what we would do in a rural environment where we may only get, like 12 or 16 firefighters where they're getting 33. So still doing the same work. Not saying the right one's wrong, but we're still getting the same work done. So people need to understand that different is not wrong. As my old captain used to say, it's just different.
It's just different.
So I want to talk a little bit about, because you're in an urban environment, you've got a lot of taxpayers, and you said 4 and 5 story, probably walk up some high rises. Any single families in your area?
We do, but they're not like the usual, 90% of America. It's not like a 1.5, 2.5 story freestanding house, like our private dwellings are like, brownstones, 3-4 story brownstone that became at some point they were either a single family or they were a 2-family. And now they just, with real estate being pretty worthful around here, they've converted a 3-4 story brownstone to a single family home. So, I mean, that's technically by definition will be a private house, private dwelling. But we would treat that like a walk-up. It's a flat roof. It's a tenement pretty much. And then we do have some like peaked roof buildings, but they're not really like freestanding. There's one little section of the city that you have a dozen or so, but not much. That's not really our bread and butter. We get some action in them, but really, they're worth some decent money. So I think people are a little more attentive to this stuff, and it's not like a crappy area or whatever. Mostly multiple dwellings, 95%. Residential occupied, multiple dwellings, high rise, 5-6 story walk ups, 5-6 story apartment buildings, big wide buildings. We do have some commercial. I mean, we have a lot of commercial, but when you like the ratio, it's predominantly residential. It was a very, I guess, turn of the century. It was a lot of industry, and that's just all came and went. You don't really have any of that. You have some, but very, very little to what it used to be. A lot of the factories and the warehouses were the factories were converted to like apartment buildings, so they kept like the aesthetics of the building, and it's it's beautiful. But now they made it into a dwelling. So and the same thing. Some of them are worth a lot of money, but the industries kind of came and went back in the 70s, I would say 80s. The buildings are there. It's just that the occupancy changed. And then, we have a mini subway, I guess. It's called the PATH train that connects right to New York City and Jersey City. Pretty much a lot of places you jump on that and take to immediate areas of New Jersey, northeast, right, bordering Manhattan. And then we have above ground rail, New Jersey Transit. That'll take you. I mean, you go all over the state into New York State, throughout New Jersey. We have light rail. So, I mean, we have a decent amount of train work. Not that we, get a lot of action there, but just that's what we have within the city. Some high-rise commercial, predominantly high-rise residential. What else do we have? Decent amount of senior buildings, believe it or not. Like for a small square mile city, we have like a ton of churches and a decent amount of senior buildings. So like high rises, they're almost like project style buildings, I would say. But a little bit different. The challenges of a project, more or less. Yeah, flat roof. That's pretty much our bread and butter. Flat roof, wood construction, wood frame, ordinary construction. And then obviously like the high rises, the fireproof, fire resistant buildings. Yeah, we have like our main drag, which is like Washington Street. So you have a lot of mixed occupancies. You have a lot of, ground floor businesses, and then 4, 5 floors of residents above. And they're all 120-year-old buildings. Now they're just getting older and older. They've been to some degree they've been modernized, but they're still, old brick and joist buildings.
So let's talk a little bit about your bread and butter, your flat roofs. Now, your bread and butters, are we looking at commercial or more residential?
Residential.
So what are you looking for as a chief officer? First of all, learn it out. When you get a typical box alarm or full assignment on a residential, what are you getting, like 3 or 4 engine companies?
So we have total in the city, we have 3 engines, 2 trucks, and a rescue, and then myself. So we have 7 units on duty at all times. Obviously there's reasons why you could be tapped out of, off duty if you're on another run, if you're off for training where you're not really off duty, but you'd be on like a delayed response. But everybody knows if a fire reporter comes in, training's canceled and guys are jumping on the rig to go. But yeah, we have 6 pieces of apparatus in the battalion's car. So we'll go down to 22 minimum total, including myself and my aide. Amp powers, obviously not, we're working on it, but it's not, it's definitely not 5 and 6 per apparatus. It's, we'll go down as low as 3, including the officer. I know, like I said, we're getting away from that. So we're trying to get away from that with hiring guys, doing all right with that. But pretty much half the rigs have 4 members on it with the officer, and then half the rigs have 3 with the officer. So the procedures are that the engines will ride heavy when it's the first, when there's not enough to support 4 per apparatus, the engine will get the 4th man before the truck. And, the logic of that is just water is going to put the fire out. And, the flip side of that is it might delay, not necessarily delay surges, but now just some work isn't going to be getting done as fast as it would like to be. But not odd, but I guess, maybe a little unique, or at least in this area, we ride with the trucks in the front of the engines in the firehouse. So it's not like, it's a one way in, one way out. We don't have like a pull through. And one house does, but it's not operational. But we'll ride with the truck company in the front, the engine behind. And again, it works for us just because we have one way streets. The truck gets the address, and then we kind of take like a northern and southern approach to the building. So the engine on the north side is going to cover the north side of the building. The engine on the south side is going to cover the south side. The second due companies pretty much beyond that are going to just kind of have to fight to get their way in. They're more manpower companies at that point. Depending on the street, everything's overhead wires. So depending on the street, getting a second aerial in is not as, realistic and practical, just because, again, you might not have a shot with the stick to begin with, without some really, smooth positioning and, maneuvering around. So getting a second aerial up, there's only, dozen streets that you're going to do that in. The rest are all overheads, and they just line up perfectly with the height of most roofs, or prevent you from getting to the roof.
I might piss off a few engine guys that are listening to this, but I'm all for the truck going out first.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just works for us. Makes sense.
I've been a truck guy my whole life. Engine's great. Cut your teeth on the engine and move over to the truck, and then we have a good time. Got to get the truck up front anyway. You can stretch the hose. So when you you riding, your units arrive on the scene as a chief, what are you looking for? I mean, obviously, if you've got a well-oiled crew, very little needs to be said on the radio. You're policy driven. If it's a policy driven tight fire, sometimes there's a little out of the ordinary stuff. But what are your guys looking for? What line? What's their go-to line and forcible entry, stuff like that? What are they running into?
Well, yeah. So I mean, go-to is 1.75 inch. We have our beds set up like all dead loaded beds. We have 1.75 inch on the left and the right. Then we have a 2.5 inch bed in the middle, and then we have 5-inch supply hose within the middle of that. It's like four individualized compartments. 1.75 inch is pretty much the way we go. The only thing we have, our standpipe stuff was changed probably a few years back. They switched to 2-inch hose across the board. We used to have just 1.75 inch with, wasn't the best to set up. We were running combination nozzles and gated Ys and, all the things that the high-rise gurus tell you not to do. We were doing that up until not that long ago. But yeah, so we run 1.75 inch a lot. I try to tell the guys, we're policy driven in that, the first two, they have assignments, the first due engine, the first due truck, the second due truck, the second due engine, but it's a little bit fluid with line selection. Like, it's not like, a lot of places do it with residential, you have to use 1.75 inch, whereas a commercial, you have to use a 2.5 inch. We give discretion to the officer in command or the first due engine. You want guys to kind of be able to make those decisions, to know the ability of the line that they're picking and why, not just, oh, well, we have a warehouse, so I'm going to take a 2.5 inch. Okay, but you have 2 garbage cans on fire in the front door. Why do we need a 2.5 inch? So it kind of gives latitude to the first due officer, and it's really that communication is helpful with the first due truck. They got to find the fire, find out what's going on, and give a solid report back to the engine. Pretty much direct them, suggest what line they should take. If they're telling you they got a BS fire in the front door, like 1.75 inch is presumed. If they're telling you half the building's on fire, then they're going to go with a 2.5 inch type of thing. But yeah, they're directing them in where they're bringing the line, and then more or less what line they should take. Again, most times I think people underestimate the power of that 1.75 inch. Properly pumped, properly stretched, you could do a lot of damage with that. Because we don't have that many guys on the rig, I always say there's a lot of instances where maybe the 2.5 inch would be great, but if we can't get it to where we need it, what's the point of it? If it's a 3-man engine and one of them is the engine chauffeur, you have an officer and a fireman stretching the line, you might have to make a half a dozen turns, and you might have 200 feet to the front door of the building before you even start making your way in. So, it kind of loosey-goosey with that, with the line selection. I think that's for the right reason. I know New York City, they finally update, or not finally, but when they modified their books pretty recently in the last so many years, they gave that discretion back to the officer, and I think it's just common sense. Why be pigeonholed into doing something just because of the occupancy of the building? Let fire conditions drive, your decision making. Let the officers make some calls, and you're You're gonna make mistakes. That's how you learn, right? We learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, that's key. I'm glad you said that. And, I figured you would anyway. A lot of times on these shows, I talk a lot about decision making, and leaders afraid to that paralysis of making a decision. They're afraid they're going to make the wrong decision. It's okay to make mistakes. We can recover. We can talk about it later. But allowing those guys, dictate what do you have versus what are you going to use to take care of what you're seeing. So yeah, I think the old saying in the fire service, once you always say always and never, if you start using those, you're destined to fail. So the fire ground's very fluid, it's very dynamic, and it moves. And like you said, you might have, what kind of smoke do you have coming out of, light smoke showing out of the front of a Home Depot is a lot different than light smoke showing out in front of a house.
Yeah.
One could be extremely big, it just hadn't shown itself yet. But being able to, giving those guys a latitude to make those decisions based on what they need. And then to be honest, like, hey, we're going to need another line in here or whatever, because maybe we don't have enough water. And one of the other things that you said was the 1 3/4 line. You're right. A lot of people need to understand that those hose lines can flow a lot. You can get 250 gallons a minute out of an 1 3/4 line. It's going to be like a steel pipe in your hand.
Yeah.
But if you need that to be bumped up, it can be done to be managed, especially if you're either using smooth bores or low pressure combination nozzles, fog nozzles. One of the things that I was able to push forward, like you mentioned New York City, in a perfect world, we'd use smooth bore everywhere. It's cheaper. They don't clog. They don't break. They don't have springs inside them or anything like that. They flow a decent amount of water, less nozzle reaction. We ended up kind of splitting the difference of, all right, we're never going to get rid of fog nozzles, but they're going to be breakaways with smooth bores underneath. So, you got the option. You can ring it off and go with the smooth bore. And you're right about the 2.5. I think in my 34 years in Montgomery County, I've pulled and when used a 2.5 on a working building fire once. Wow. And I was a captain. It was we're riding heavy that day. And I had a dude who was an NFL football player. And I had another guy that bench presses Volkswagens for fun. In myself. So I'm like, hey guys, we had a mailbox, etc., parcel store, throwing ball. And I was like 2.5 off the back, and they're like, Cap, this is the best we've never pulled one before. And we knocked it all down. I said, well, let's go in and finish. So I had two dudes that could bench press Volkswagens, so. But
no, and I mean that's got to be a factor. That's got to be a factor as the officer. And I mean, back to the whole giving them the ability to make the decisions. They need to know. I mean, for us, we're a little bit. We change positions. Like we don't have set assignments. You could be on. You could be. We'll cross trade. So you could have a guy who could pump water one day, and then he could drive the truck another day. We usually try to keep more or less like the best team on the field, so to speak. But guys are, they're versatile. They are able to, if they work on mutual, they should be able to drive the truck if they're usually assigned to the engine, and vice versa, or any position. Point I'm making is like, the officer needs to turn around and look back. All right, do I have two people that I never worked with? Then, the one guy is 20 years old and he's 160 pounds. And then the other guy is, 65 years old. He's a month away from retirement. All right, well, yeah, I might want a 2.5 today, but I'm not getting a 2.5 today. Whereas, if you have two guys who are ready to run the 60 at the combine, it's a different story, So I think that's a big, what you may want to do may not always work out with what you have, the cards you have in front of you, so to speak.
It's funny. One of the things that I've got to work on, we were redoing how we packed our attack lines on our engines. We have, the county had county engine companies, and we wanted to make sure that all the lines were consistent wherever you got detailed to. We did the same thing in Montgomery County, same in Frederick. You're assigned to a station, but not necessarily that piece of apparatus. So you might, one day you'll be on the tower, next day you might be on the ambulance, because we do EMS, and then you'd be on the engine and whatnot. But one of the things that we did, we were trying to redo the attack lines. Maybe we want to pack them a little bit differently. We got a lot of input from people around, and the fire chief came to me and said, hey, I just want you to know we're going to be buying 10 new fire engines, so you have a chance to change the hose in general, vendor, nozzles, things like that. Why don't you look into that? So I was like, man, I was excited. We ended up, a bunch of vendors that were out there, we ended up settling on Mercedes hose out of Canada.
We run those.
So we tested the 2.5, 1 3/4, 2-inch, all true ID, and we really liked it. Wrote up the proposal, And one of the guys that was on the committee, a captain, really seasoned captain, good fireman, he said, hey, Chief, he said, what do we want to do about the 1.5 inches? We never tested the 1.5 inches. And I said, you're right. We should test 1.5 inches. We're not going to go to it, but at least that way we can say, we tested it. It didn't work. We covered all our bases. So we asked for 200 feet, 1.5 inches for Mercedes. So they brought it down. We put 150 PSI nozzle, or 150 gallon per minute nozzle, fixed gallons nozzle at 50 PSI. And I told him, I said, take it back to your station, run some tests, flow tests and all that stuff, and then give me the numbers. About a week later, he called up. He said, Chief, you're not going to believe this. He said, we were getting 150 gallons per minute out of that 1.5 inch hose. And I'm like, what was your pump pressure? He said 140. I said, go run the numbers again. He said, we ran them 3 times. He said, but I'll run them one more time. And we ended up, when it came time to make the decision, we got 2.5 for our smoothbore, large line. We have 2.5 inch standpipe pack, but we also have 2 inch standpipe pack. Depends on what's showing when you get there for our high rises. And then they came down to the 1.75 inch, and they said, okay, you got a proposal, you got your numbers, 1.75 inch, 1.5 inch. What do you want to do? And I looked at the ops chief, and I'm like, I'm not making this choice. You make the choice. You're the boss. And he says, go with the 1.5 inch. So Montgomery County will all 1.5 inch. They got rid of all their 1.75 inch. They're running 1.5 inch. You're getting 150 gallons a minute at 140 PSI. And we've had it for about 7 years now. Haven't heard any complaints.
It works.
The only complaint they had, because our nozzles were fixed gallons with low PSI. And so the lines flew too much. I said, well, learn hose line management. I said, because that's what happens when you have low pressure nozzles, but you get the gallons per minute minus the nozzle reactions.
Yeah. Yep.
And that 1.5 inch line fights a lot of fire. And the guys love it because you can whip that thing anywhere, around corners and whatnot, and you're still getting that punch. And if the fire's big, we got 2 inch line as a backup, which is 250 at 50. So you've got choice, and we leave that up to the officers. Make the choice when you have, we set parameters like, hey, if you roll up and you've got a McMansion in the Potomac area of Montgomery County, and you've got the whole second floor off, and this house is 35,000 square feet, 1.5 inches probably not going to help you.
Probably not going to, yeah.
Let's do something a little bit bigger. But that's awesome that you just let your guys make those choices. That pays dividends in the long run. And like you said, even if they make a mistake, you're going to have a hot wash at the end of it and say, hey, tell me what you did and why you did it. Because there's times as a chief, I learned I'm not going to jump into anybody's ass until I know the whole story. And then, hey, when we rolled up, Chief, we just had a little bit of smoke. We pulled an 1.5 inch line. We got in there, triple pane windows, a really good door. We opened it up. We had a whole apartment off. We didn't know.
Right. No, and I think that's totally reasonable. And honestly, that's one of my favorite parts. Of course, the action during, but like the after, next day after, it's policy. You critique it afterwards. I like, I wear my camera. I do it for like accountability purposes. It's great. You get the most successful athletes in the world watch hours and hours of film for like an hour's worth of game. We could learn from this. We could use this as a potential, learning tool. And I usually started off, hey guys, I fucked this up and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you see that? Look how stupid I look and how I sound. And I did this. In hindsight, I would have done that. Or if I knew this, if I knew right now, back then, what I know right now, I would have handled it differently. But to discuss those things and, bring it to light so that hopefully one of the guys, if they're in that position, say, hey, you know what? I remember that happened to Gracia this one time. You know what? That's going to be in the back of my head. I'll be able to pull from that one day. And also, I think it sets the tone as the highest ranking guy to say, hey, I'm nobody. I'm not Superman. I make mistakes. And then it's going to open up the door for the next guy to say, you know what? He'll feel more inclined to say, yeah, you know what? I screwed this up. It becomes like contagious. If everybody pretends that everything went so well, it's full of shit. We all know it. If you didn't have any mistakes at the fire, you either weren't paying attention or, you weren't at the same fire that everybody else was at, Yeah,
100%. And I've had that theme on this podcast so many times of as the chief, you go first and you say like, hey, here's some of the things that I should have done. I didn't do, I didn't hear this. I should have done this better. And like you said, that allows other people to recognize like, hey, Chief's admitting that, he makes mistakes and, I made a mistake and, hey, I'm not going to get hammered for this, or I'm not going to get in trouble for this. Your reaction to, hey, you pull the 1.75 inch, probably should have pulled the 2.5. Next time, you see something like that, they put that in their head. But to be able to admit, as the incident commander, hey, I made some mistakes. I didn't hear this. I didn't do that. I should have done this. I didn't say that. It allows those guys to recognize that, he's human.
Yeah.
Show your humility. You're human. We all make mistakes. Let's learn from it and move forward. And that's what I tell my guys. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from it. If you keep making the same mistake, then we'll think something's wrong with you. But
yeah, I was just going to say, you try to keep them to where they're not as costly, obviously. But the big thing is you gotta take something from it and learn from it. Hopefully, not duplicate the same mistakes. The mistakes in terms of costly, that I think comes from experience and like learning and knowing the job. And with the line, picking which line, I think that's one of those things to where you need to have experience to draw from. If you've never been on that tip of the nozzle where you're seeing how much damage you could do with that small line, how much you're doing with a water extinguisher, how much you're doing with a 2.5. Like, you need to be able to draw from that. If you don't have that, you're always going to think, oh, this isn't enough, or we'll never need that, type of thing. You need to have that firsthand experience. And the other thing I'll just say is, if you're on the cusp, like you're standing in front of a building and you're really like, I can't make a decision, 2.5 or an inch and a half or an inch and a quarter, go bigger at that point. Hard pressed of like not being sure, go bigger, because it's probably your gut feeling is right. If you're definitively going with the inch 3/4, you got it. If you're on the fence, that means you probably should be going with the bigger line.
Right.
So
truer words never spoken. So what are some of the forcible entry challenges you're finding, in the city? Obviously, the city's going to be vastly different than the suburbs and things like that.
Yeah, we got like a mix of everything. So we have like just solid wood doors in, like what we call tenements, ordinary construction, brick and joist buildings. You'll have solid wood doors and a wood frame. You'll have a lot of these places are even doing like almost like a wrap door, almost like a calamine door, they call them, where they're like metal wrapped around the wood, solid wood door. Then you'll have a metal jamb with a metal door. Even in wood construction, we run into those in high rises a lot, with coating and stuff. But pretty much first due truck, they're assigned tools. The guy in the back or the two guys in the back will carry hooks. In a wooden construction building, anything ordinary or wood framed. In a high rise, they'll carry a hook, but they'll also carry a set of like heavy irons, like a sledgehammer. Not a sledgehammer, a maul.
Yeah, a maul.
Right, a maul with Halligan tool. The officer will carry the hydroram, like the small rabbit tool. We carry them anyway, for the most part, wood construction, high-rise, low-rise, just because, again, with the way these doors are now, you don't know what you're going to have. You don't know if the building was renovated. It doesn't hurt to have. But also, you'll have a set of irons there. Typical in, like, the ordinary buildings, you'll have anywhere from 2 to 3 locks, not counting the dead knob lock. So, you'll have your regular deadbolt a couple inches above the knob itself. Then maybe within a foot to a foot and a half, you'll have another lock. And then even some of them, you'll have a second lock there. Like an older rim lock or just a regular mortise lock. But it just depends. It depends what you run into. Some of them will have like those angle iron guards where they kind of protect like the leading edge of the door where it meets the jamb. Those are a little challenging, but I mean, again, it's learning like where to position the tool, how to find like a bite and purchase point, and then working around and trying to exploit the weak point of that. I mean, usually we operate pairs. There are times where guys will be remote. So obviously, your tactics will differ if you're by yourself. Guys are carrying, a lot of guys are carrying those metal wedges now. Those are really helpful. I think those are great if you're coming in off a fire escape and you're checking on, is it a pot of food or is it the back of the apartment is burning? All right, we could snap that lock versus, smash the windows and cause damage for no reason. If it's a fire, obviously we'll bet you're off. But if it's something you're investigating, you're not sure, we have an odor, we have a loose report, those metal wedges are great. They're great to just get a bite on the door or pop a lock on a double hung window. They're really nice on like the rear of a commercial occupancy or a mixed occupancy where you have like, a really tight jam. They give you a little bit of a, little gap. So those are really helpful for that. Trying to think of some other things guys are carrying out. There's a company, I'm blanking out, I should know this. The company by a New York City fireman. He has this thing, it's almost like pretty much to simulate how guys used to carry a credit card and like slip the lock. It's like a thin roll of plastic, like heavy duty plastic. And it's supposed to be like, just slip the slam latch on the door. If the deadbolt's engaged, it's not going to work. A lot of guys are carrying that now. If you need to sneak a door real quick for food on the stove or, just checking on an odor. What else? Shove knives. Those are really helpful. Those are good. Just like I said, we're not like property conservation nuts by any means. We enjoy like breaking stuff as much as anybody else. but we try to instill, like, guys, if it's work, do whatever the hell you got to do. Especially me, I don't care. Do what you got to do. It's justified. We're on the scene of a working fire. But if it's like BS and, don't start smashing windows like 2 floors above the reported floor, you can't, that's just unprofessional. You can't justify that. You wouldn't want it done at your own place. So, we try to have those like through the lock and like those little gadgets handy as well for the times when we're not going to just break. But just basic forcible entry, I said, you don't want to get too far away from all the tools and the gadgets. And even like I would put like the Hydro Ram, the rabbit tool in there because it's a hydraulic tool. It's, tons of force. It works great, but you don't want guys to be so dependent upon that when that's out of service or it's defective or whatever other reason it's not available. You lose it, you dropped it, you forgot it on the rig. You have to be able to just do bare brute force, forcible entry, Halligan and axe, even in metal doors, and you break your ass, you kill yourself, but there's times when you need to. That might be all you have.
And that was going to be my next question is with the Hydro Ram, everybody, that's their go-to. And I tell people, I said, those tools are only good for metal frames or a door that's, has concrete around it, a metal frame, something like that. You're not using it on a residential with a wooden jam or whatever. You put 10 tons of force on something that's put together with staples.
Yeah, you blow the wall out before you blow the door and the lock.
Right. So that's what I was going to ask is, do you guys go with the conventional forcible entry? We really, with Capital Fire, when we go out and teach, we really, really hone in on, hey guys, let's focus on using irons. Let's focus on, irons on irons, or using the Halligan hook and the Halligan bar, or even a set of irons, or even like you said, the heavy irons with a 10-pound mini sledge or a maul, and really focus on that conventional forcible entry.
Yeah.
To get those tools back in your hands because, and I tell people, I said, yeah, the Hydro Ram's great, but what if you're on the second floor of a garden apartment building and you've got a good fire going in the middle unit and you've got to check the ones on left and right as well? You only got one Hydro Ram, but are you going to wait? Or are you going to use your irons to open those doors up? And you can open a lot of doors, with a set of irons or a couple of sets of irons. Yeah. So that's where what I was going to ask with that. And then, looking at, you had said some of those rim locks and things like that. I think we've gotten so far away from using the K and the R tool. It's like a lost art, but I tell these guys, I said, look, whether you spin the lock off on an Adams right lock or you pull it off with the K tool, there's value in knowing how to, get into those with minimal damage. You can screw that back in, make sure you leave a note. Because they're going to put their key in there and it's not going to work. But, let them know that, hey, we had to force your door. Here's the fire department is our number, blah, blah, blah. But so it sounds like you guys are going the conventional route first, having that Hydro Ram as a backup, or if you're getting the initial door and you got to get another door, still bringing those sets of irons. Like I say, it's like taking an axe up on the roof. The axe always starts. So do the iron.
Yeah. No, we still have it in our procedures. We call it like the vent man that goes to the roof. He still takes a pickhead axe. Like a utility rope, just in case you got a hole to saw up. If you just go in and check initially to take natural openings, and then you need a saw to hole up, you have a means to start opening, even if it's just like a bulkhead or a scuttle hatch or a skylight. You have something to break with, and if you need to start cutting, you kill yourself, but it'll work. It'll definitely work. And technique for that, obviously, if you've done it, slow.
You make your guys go up and do some roof work. Obviously, they're going to go with the saw, either a vent saw, chainsaw, or a rotary saw. But do you ever say like, "Hey guys, let's open this up with an axe. Let's get that 8-pound axe and
oh yeah." When we get like acquired buildings or building that's about to be demoed or knocked down, we do that all the time. When we get up there, it's like, all right, yeah, we get the new kid to get on the saw, let him feel, get the actual saw work. But then some of the older guys will challenge the new kid, strong kid. Hey, you think you could open this up? Like it was pre saw days, and then the guy starts wailing on, beating hell out of it, and then then you have a guy who's been there and done that. They're showing them like with minimal effort, nice and slow, smooth strokes, and they're like not blowing their energy and whatnot. And the amount of opening that they're getting is totally different than the guy who's wailing on it, killing himself and dripping wet. But yeah, we do that. We definitely do that a lot, just to show. Hope you never need to do it, but if you need to do it, you can at least start as your initial saw craps out. You get on the radio, hey, we need another saw up here. And you know what? In the meantime, you could start doing something. You could start opening to some degree. But you're right. The saw doesn't always start, but the axe does.
And like you said, there's a technique, and I tell the people that are listening to this: if you get an acquired structure or you build yourself a roof prop, go get your flathead axe and practice opening that roof up with the axe, an 8-pound axe. And I'm going to give you a little hint. A, you shouldn't be painting the heads of your axe, and B, don't use the blade to open it up. Use the back end of that thing. It's such a wider, and I'm telling you, you can be on your knees and you don't even have to take full swings. It's just little chops.
Yeah.
And the damage that 8-pound axe does, and you got enough energy that you can make that. And it's not going to be a perfect square. I'm going to tell you that. It's going to be more of a oval, but it gets the job done. So I challenge you guys, go out there and use the hand tools. Go old school, because sometimes the saw ain't going to work, and sometimes the hydroram's it's going to blow an O-ring. So go old school.
And you don't want that first time to be when you're in the middle of, not such a great situation to start, testing it out. Oh, well, we talked about it, but we never did it. Yeah, it's not the time you want to start, getting your hands on that stuff. And I also, like, back to the hydroram stuff, you kind of see when guys are a little bit, like, unfamiliar with the hand tools. Like, I kind of spot it right away when guys are a little bit, like, taking a look at it, like, all right, well, how should I configure the forks to put into this tool? Like, it should be where it's natural. You know what I mean? Even now as a chief, like, I grab tools all the time. I overstep my boundaries, not on the fire ground, like, stuff like that. But if we're training, I'll grab it, I'll mess around, just have fun. But I want it to be like an extension to where I'm just doing it. I'm not even thinking. Like, I shouldn't have to sit in front of a door and, like, go through a checklist. All right, turn the tool this way, and put, like, it should just happen naturally from training and from experience and from, just having the familiarity with the tools, and that's any tool you're going to be using, a saw, a hook. That's another thing. It's very technique. A lot of the older guys, I was lucky enough to learn. A lot of the 70s and 80s guys were still on the job, and they were very tradesy. They were all handymen. They taught you stuff. You don't have to know the difference between a flat and Phillips head screwdriver, and they would teach you things that would make you handy. And unfortunately, nowadays, a lot of the guys getting into the job aren't as handsy. They're just not a little bit more tech savvy and blue collar trade, maybe stuff. There's still a lot of guys. I'm lucky. I still got a lot. I've one for every trade. I got a plumber. I got my electrician. I got my HVAC guy. I got my builders, but it doesn't seem to be as common as it once was, to where the minority would have been the guy who could build your website, and the majority was all the tradesmen. Now it's almost like, the pendulum swung a little bit.
Do some kick-ass YouTube videos, but having a hard time swinging an axe.
Yeah, that's right.
It's funny. We have in my volunteer house in my community, we have a juniors program. So we bring the kids in from the age 12 to, once they turn 16, they age out, they go into the seniors, or they become members. But one of the things that when I was teaching that, when my son was going through it and my daughter, they were juniors, and my daughter,
wow, that's cool.
She asked me, she says, "Dad, what comes after juniors?" I said, "Nothing." Not for you.
That's funny.
But she didn't want to do it anyway. But the story I'm getting at is that we found that these kids have never had tools in their hands. Now, we don't let them use chainsaws or anything like that. We're not monsters. But I'd go out there and say, "Here's a flathead axe, 8 pounds." We'd have a big log, and I said, "Take a couple of swings on it." And you'd watch them, and it was like, "All right, I'm going to show you how to swing an axe. This is going to pay you dividends as you move forward in life. It's especially if you want to heat your own house with wood, you're going to have to learn how to swing an axe." And we're seeing the same thing with the recruits that are coming through, 18, 20-year-olds. They've never done any manual labor like that before. So getting those hand tools in their hands so they know how to swing an axe, they know how to swing a sledgehammer proficiently without wearing themselves out after 2 shots, that's important. And one of the things that you said is that you think you overstepped your bounds during training, you're grabbing your tools. I'm going to tell you right now, in my volunteer chief's car, I've got an 8-pound axe and a 5-foot hook, a Halligan hook.
I love it.
And in my assistant chief's car for work, I've got a 4-foot hook and an 8-pound axe.
That's amazing.
Anytime if I'm put in the forward position, I am a firm believer that my radio is not my only tool. I have to go in with a tool in my hand. Even as a battalion chief, before I retired, I'd always go in with my 5-foot hook. Somebody would always come in. I said, "All right, let's get this room open." I was usually off the engine company. I was like, "Well, we don't have any tools." "Why don't they have any tools?" We're on the engine. That's what I hear. I'm like, "Does your engine carry hooks?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "So what does that mean?" And so I give them my hook. My hook saw more work in other people's hands than it did in my own hand.
That's funny.
But that was my thing, is like, hey, you're a 4-person engine crew, drivers out. I got 3 people coming in. One of you all needs to have a hook. Okay. I would say 2 of you all need to have a hook. One guy's got the nozzle. He should be able to handle that himself. The officer should have a hook or some type of tool. And that backup man that's around that corner should have a hook with him feeding it in. Once that fire's knocked, Truck's
Yeah, we gotta
probably out
start opening
searching.
up.
So go open up that room, check for that extra fire. So I tried to really get that into my guys' heads. It's like, just because you're on an engine doesn't mean that you don't bring a hand tool with you. Same thing with forcible entry. I was like, if you're a single engine house and you roll up on the scene and working a house fire and the door's locked, are you waiting for the truck to
How
show
are
up
you
to
gonna
get
get in?
in?
Yeah. Yep. 100%. No, I definitely have had that same conversation, man. You
Always walk
gotta.
in without, never walk in with an empty hand. You should always have a tool in your hand.
No, I totally agree. And, you don't want to feel helpless anytime on the job, So if you do get there first, I mean, imagine being like, all right, yeah, we can't get in. There's somebody hanging out of a window. Like, I do the same. I carry a whole bunch of tools in the car, but, whether you need to use it, I don't know. But they may need to use it. I'm going to say I'm glad I had it, as opposed to, the next two companies 2 minutes away and somebody's up Shit's Creek because we can't get in.
And I know when I'm assigned a forward position, my job is not to go in there and grab the nozzle, start opening up and stuff like that. I'm looking out for my guys, but I'm going to let you in a little secret. When those guys' air runs out and I'm bringing the next crews in, when they leave, I've got that nozzle in my hand and I'm fucking around. And I'm pulling fumes. I'm doing all kinds of fun stuff.
God, I
And then
have
when they
so
show
many
up, I'm
things.
like, here you go.
I have things on my phone that like I always, not always, seldomly I'll put up random stuff of just funny things, trying to make people laugh or whatnot. And yeah, so many dumb videos and pictures of me, that I, in a white hat, I shouldn't have certain tools in my hand, but whatever.
I
think
just tell them,
care,
that was in between. I was waiting for the next crew to come in and I'm just keeping the fire in check.
Right. Hey, I didn't ask them to give it to me, we just found it type of
thing.
Right.
Exactly. But, so we're coming up towards the end here. I got about another 7-8 minutes, but it's cool to kind of like we talked about, talking about the tactic stuff, and it's nice to just get back, because then I can kind of go back and from the days when I actually was able to ride the fire engine. I still get to do that in the volley house. That's all bets are off there. Even though you're a chief, it doesn't mean you're not driving the engine or the truck or riding in the back or whatever. It's all good.
That's what you get the best of both worlds, right?
Absolutely. I think it's important that, as a chief officer, you still need to have those skills. You still need to, if your guys are out training, you should be out there with them training. Whatever's in your office, whatever paperwork needs to be done, that shit will be there when you get back. Sometimes you might have to stay up till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. But if your guys are out training, if they're doing rope work or they're doing some forcible entry stuff or whatever, go out there and just be with them. Not only does it show them that you're human and you're with them, but it also keeps your skills sharp as well.
I was just going to say that I do that to be involved in, the camaraderie and all that stuff. But also it's like, it's a big thing just to stay sharp in what's current. I mean, when I wrote a rig 5 years ago, shit's changed since then. I want to be up to date on the most current stuff, because I want to make sure we're on the same page when they're using a specialized tool or, whatever's current. I want to be in the know. I don't want to find out like when we're in the middle of an operation, like, what the hell is that thing? I've never seen that before. Oh, yeah, we've had that for 2 years. All right, well, I haven't been on a rig in several years. That explains it. Shame on me for not being involved, And, yeah, I think just the training sessions that you get involved with and you show up for, which I do very, very frequently, that's where you see your competent hands, because now you're going to know, all right, I've seen this and I've seen this and I've seen that. Now when shit's on, you're going to say, I'm glad these guys are turning the corner right now, as opposed to maybe those guys or whatever. Like, yeah, you get to, you should be finding out the deficiencies and the strong things people bring to the table ahead of time. Not like, we're not in the Bronx to where like we're going to 5 fires a day. So it's like, you can't expect to just do that every single time. Oh, we're going to just do it at a job. No, you got to do that stuff beforehand so that you could operate as best as you could when it's a fire. At least that's how I operate. And I think, if I know going in what guys lack or what their strong suits are, that's just going to help me make decisions. And it's going to make sure that like I know these things are getting done, or it's going to tell me, I don't even think about it. That guy's got 30 years on the job, squared away as it gets. I know it's done. If he tells me something on the radio, I keep moving. I don't think twice about it. Whereas if it's another guy, I might have to kind of like nudge him a little bit. Hey, what's up, man? What do you got up there? Give me that again. Because what I'm seeing and what you're saying isn't really jiving right now, So that I think is, doing it ahead of time is huge. You rehearsals, I guess you kind of like, you plan out what's going on. Like I know what I'm doing anytime before a fire comes in. I know I got to just see where is the fire, what kind of building on it. All the shit that I'm supposed to be doing, I have it done already. We should all know what we have to do. You just adjust to those few things that are very important when you get there. Where is the fire? What kind of building is it in? Are there people trapped? You know, other than that, I know what I'm doing as first do. I know what I'm doing as second do. I know the kind of building I'm in. There's a lot of things you could kind of pre-plan and have planned out ahead of time, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so valuable, like you said, to train with your guys. Doesn't matter what your rank is; they're your guys. You get to see, it also, you get to see maybe they're not acting like they should be, or maybe they're a little off. It might be one of those side conversations. Hey, man, is everything all right? Things don't seem to be. And that could snowball into something else. But
Yeah.
being a responsible boss, that's not only are you seeing the skill of your guys, and all right, looks like we're a little rusty with hand lines, maybe we need to start drilling on that a little bit, or hey, looks like we're having some issues with our hand tools or whatever, we need to do a little bit of that, or whatever. So it allows you to make sure your guys are getting what they need, but it's also giving them face time with you and showing you that I'm human just like you. I'm a fireman just like you.
Yeah.
And, I want to make sure not only are you doing the job well, but that I know the job. And if I'm asking you to do something, I already know how to do it as well.
Yeah, you can't get too far detached. And I mean, I know everybody has a different philosophy. I'm still in like fireman mode. Like I still think like I'm driving the rig and, or in the back of the rig or, sitting in the front of the rig. But I still try to think that way no matter where I'm at. I want to always get back to those basics and not lose sight of that because of paperwork or, setting up 5 command boards and, I did 30 part checks. Like, yeah, okay, but did anybody stretch a line? Is water on the fire? Is there a ladder up? Did they force the door? Was the search started? I need those basics things to get done and stabilize the scene before all this other shit gets done. That's my philosophy. I remember when I first got moved up, my aide, who's, I mean, thank God for him. Like we're lucky. We're very spoiled. I know you said you guys don't have them down there. We do have them. My mindset changed from when I was a fireman and an officer. I was, F that. I want another guy pulling a line when it's, it's blowing out of however many windows. And the chief at the time was like, you'll see one day, trust me. And he was right. We still have this conversation to this day. But having an aide, it's just like, it's, another set of eyes, another set of ears, another brain. They're driving you to the scene, which is just, in this area, as many other areas, it's a friggin' nightmare, construction and pedestrians and vehicle traffic and street closings. So, yeah, having that aid is huge. And it definitely takes a huge burden off you because you could just concentrate on what needs to be done, but what I was getting at is that ultimately I try not to lose sight of the basic stuff. And I remember saying to him, I was like, listen, man, we're not setting up a command board if we get a fire. And he goes, no, we do that at some point. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. I'm like, all right, cool. That's what I was hoping for, but I didn't know, it's something new here. But, yeah, stick to the basics, make sure those priorities are getting done. If we delay searches and we delay water, things probably aren't going to be going so low on the fire ground. Whether it's a little house or it's a big apartment building, you delay those things and yeah, you're not finding anybody and the fire's getting bigger. Oh, that's another thing, like our mindset, or not mine, but my department's mindset for many years. The truck in the front, they get on the scene, they could pop the door and they could start a search. Find the fire, find anybody that might be stuck. Whereas if the engine was in front, yeah, we'll get water. But back to your point, all right, well, who's forcing the door? If we got a 3-man engine, how many, who's carrying the tools? Who's carrying the nozzle? Is the officer able to supervise, or is he going to be like a hybrid between hands-on and having to supervise? So the truck first definitely helps us out. Start the search, find the fire, communicate, get a lineup, and things usually go pretty routine.
Good stuff. Well, we're at that mark, so I want to give you a chance to, people want to find you, they want to see your stuff, where can they find you at? And if they want to get in touch with you, they got questions, how do they find you?
So I'm on Instagram. My name on the page right now, the way it's displayed, is my handle. You just got to put the @ in front of it. I actually joined TikTok, I guess, a couple months ago. I still don't really understand the whole, I'm getting the hang of it or whatever.
Same for me. My daughter's a whiz. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's different. I did it, or I could like put some other stuff up. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but yeah, I don't even know my name on there. It's not the same. And I was on Facebook, but I kind of like had some issues with that where I have the account, I just don't utilize it. My email is Joe Grassi Jr. at Gmail. So if anybody would like to email me, but I will say I'm the worst with technology, or one of the worst, and I don't do things as well as people give me advice to how to do it. So if I don't answer right away, or if I'm a week behind, it's not personal. It's just me not being very good at this. I got to get better at it. But yeah, you could reach me on any of those. And, I like talking to people. It's kind of funny how you get to I was always an anti-social media guy because I felt like it was like, to each their own, but people were using it for different reasons. And then you get the whole other side of it of like the networking and people like-minded and into the job and in whatever field you are, makeup or fire department or sports or, but it is cool, how you meet a lot of people that you would never probably run into in real life and, in person. And then you get to have conversations. You're like, oh, we have a lot in common. This is cool, and it really is. It's a
You
cool
end up on
world.
podcasts.
Yeah, no doubt. And it is cool because it's another side of it, like anything, I think you mentioned this earlier. Like what you put in is what you get out. Like I'm a believer in that with anything in life. But like if you're into this, you may be in a place where not everybody's into it, or some of the guys are into it. You could get on here and meet some people and like, hey, let's hook up at the next conference, or let's meet here, and like you could get almost like rejuvenated into the department. I know a lot of my friends have said that throughout the years. They've met so many people over the internet, and it's just like kind of rejuvenated their career. And I think so too. But I get to talk to some guys. Like I talked to a kid that was like 18 years old. He's like, oh, I'm a volunteer. I'm trying to pursue it as a career. You motivate me. I'm like, oh, it's cool, man. It's great, And then I talked to a guy that's like ready to retire, and he's like, oh, it's cool to see like a young guy like you into the job. It's fun, It really is. It's a cool thing. So, the only thing I'll say is everybody just try to be careful and follow your procedures, wear your gear, wear all your equipment, and just be careful. It's a dangerous job. I think the safety thing, that kind of gets thrown around. Everybody wants to be safe and be safe. Nobody has a death wish, but like the job is dangerous. You could do things to make yourself safer. Doesn't mean you're going to be operating safely. If you don't go to a fire, I guess maybe that would be safe.
Right.
It's whatever. It's the nature of the beast. So just be careful, pay attention, be attentive, study, read, do things like this, go to classes, go on podcasts. I think all that stuff helps put your head on right when you're at work. It makes you a little more engaged than the guy that doesn't give a shit or is worried about his side job or is checked out and, oh, I can't wait till I retire in 2 years. Don't get caught by complacency. I say it to my younger guys, the guys who've been around the block all the time. It's like nobody goes to work and says, today's the day I'm going to give a Mayday, or I'm going to jump out of a window, or I'm going to get killed. It happens. Nobody ever thought they were going to do it, and obviously it's happened many times throughout the American Fire Service, and it's going to continue. So, stay, keep your head on right. Serious shit. So,
absolutely. Well, Joe, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Good stuff.
Thank you for having me.
Look forward to seeing some more of your videos, and maybe we'll catch each other live and in person at one of these trade shows that comes out, whether it's FDIC or who knows where else.
I'm in on that. Definitely in on that.
All right, man. Take care of yourself and be safe.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. You too.
Thank you.